Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Woodbury Word. I'm Dre,
And I'm Wood.
and we wanted to come to you just given everything that's going on in the world, specifically in our country. We wanted to take some time, collect ourselves, let the initial emotions subside to a degree, and just speak from the heart. What has this been like for us? We know it's been tough for a lot of people, but as two Black men, we wanted to give our perspective. So we're going to do that in this episode, and we'll get right into it. Wood, I know you had some things on your heart, on your mind. Just speak to the people, let them know what's on your heart.
Yeah, brother, it's been an ordeal for sure. The first thing that comes to mind is post-traumatic stress syndrome and what that looks like, what that feels like. For several days on end, I was exhausted. I couldn't really speak to the emotions, what was going on, and how it was affecting our reality, our everyday, what needed to be happening. But I couldn't put words to it because there were so many emotions. So this is a topic and an issue, an ongoing issue in our nation, in the world broadly, but in our nation more specifically, that it's so layered. The simple answer is, we're human. We are human. See us. But that's so layered in how we're seen and what seeing us really looks like. I'm appreciative of the allyship. I'm appreciative of those who have taken the time to pause and say, hold up, something's not right. I know I've heard time and time again the screams and the shouts for equality and equal treatment and ceasing of brutality and inequality, but it's so layered, it's so textured, and I couldn't speak to it. I couldn't get over my anger first and foremost. I couldn't get over my rage and my sadness for my community. And I couldn't figure out how to put that in words for the broader community, the broader American community, the broader world community, because there are emotions there are memories there are triggers there that most don't get. They just don't get.
Right.
If you're African American, it hits home in a different way. If you're an African American male, it hits home in a more specific way. If you know those communities, you know those people, you know that dynamic, it hits in such a different way.
It does.
So for the longest, I just couldn't put words to it, and that's rare for me on a few fronts. Number one, I don't even like to use the term woke. Yeah. But I've been aware for a very long time. What is essentially family to me, what is essentially extended family to me, showed me at an early age what real activism and protest looks like. Mm-hmm. My father was in school in Orangeburg during the Orangeburg Massacre. One of my best friends, aunts, who was essentially my aunt, who helped raise me as well, worked heavily during the Civil Rights Movement, is actually given a nod at the beginning of Angela Davis's book, basically calls her out by name and says, if it wasn't for her, if it wasn't for Connie Tucker, I wouldn't even be here. Wow. I've been aware for quite some time. So there's that part. But there's a difference between being aware, wanting to be reactionary, and getting to a point where you understand we've got to take some strategic steps, but that's got to be coupled with some painful forward movement. There's got to be some destruction here, and not just in physical property, but in institutions and established norms.
Right.
But let me let you let us know how you've been dealing, at least.
So much like you, it started out with pure anger. Anger in a way that for somebody I've never met to be that angry. And I was angry about Eric Gardner and Philando Castile, which also happened in Minneapolis. I was angered by all of those, but something about this one just really, because it wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't okay, I pulled my gun real quick and shot you 5 times. That's bad in and of itself. But this was just like, I know you're dying, and I don't care. I do not care. And so I'm grieved. It feels like I lost a loved one, because when we call each other brother and sister in our community, we mean it. Yeah, we got our stuff within our own community and all that. I get it. But when I tell you my heart hurt, I couldn't sleep. I knew I needed to turn the news off or turn my phone off. I couldn't. I just couldn't. I was looking for, I don't even know what I was looking for, to be honest with you. But then that anger turned just into like frustration. I'm reading comments from people and I'm like, how do you not understand what we're talking about? How do you not get it? Why is it that the first thing you do is, well, all police aren't bad? Why is that the first thing you go for? Why do you first take up for the institution over the human? Why is that your first reaction? Why are you so determined to make sure people know, yeah, but they're good cops? We know that. But George Floyd didn't have to die. Ahmaud Arbery didn't have to die. Breonna Taylor didn't have to die. Atiana Jefferson didn't have to die. Botham Jean didn't have to die. So why are you so stuck on a badge or an institution of policing that you hold that to a higher regard than the life that was lost?
That's right.
That pisses me off.
That's right. That's right. At some point, enough is enough.
It's enough. And so I'm trying to come up with these well thought out, non-offensive comments, and I'm writing 3 and 4 and 8 paragraphs on a Facebook post coming from the heart, really trying to get people to see, like, you know, I'm not calling anybody names, I'm not doing any of this. Like, I'm trying to explain to you, and it's still, but what about the looting and the rioting? Like, no. And these are people, if you go to their social media, they say they're Christians. And this is where I have a problem. And cut me off, because this is where I have a problem. Did you not read Luke 4:18? Where Jesus talks about who he came to preach to? He came to preach to poor, downtrodden, people who are bound, who are oppressed. That's who he came to minister to. So if you say you're a follower of his, why aren't you following his example? Why aren't you grieved by the things that grieved him? What am I missing? And then Drew Brees decided to open his mouth. And that's another topic, but how am I feeling? I went from anger to grief. I still grieve. I'm still angry. I'm not as angry in terms of I was ready to say some stuff, and it was like, nah, that won't be productive. But now I'm also using that anger and that grief to think about solutions. What are things that we can do to get some change? Because here's the thing, legislation comes first before heart changes. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, and it shouldn't be. People's hearts should change first. And there are people who are allies that you spoke about whose hearts are changing. But to get the masses, we're going to have to change how policing is done. And when that becomes law, people in 10 years, 15 years, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's how it should be done. Well, no, you had the opportunity to change your heart. You wouldn't. So we had to change some laws. And I think that's where we are.
Yeah. I mean, to speak to you, Drew Brees just is he's a symptom of, he's a symbol of the symptom of white supremacy, which is unrecognized privilege. Like, that's where we at. Your question was, how can you not see? What is it that you don't understand? How can you profess to worship a God whose primary message in his text was to the least of these?
Yes.
Who I am here for the least of these. But my issue is, if your privilege, if you can't see your privilege, then where do we start? So if you can recognize your privilege, I think that's opening the door to changing your heart. But if you can't, then how do we get you to understand your privilege? And that's where
I'm gonna jump in on that, because if you can't see your privilege, that means your privilege is working.
Right.
If you cannot see it, that means it's working. Racism is not just the N word. It's not just calling a black person a nigger. Okay, that's easy. That's
right.
Whatever. Racism is subtle. When done properly, it's subtle. And that's what we're missing. We're talking about the egregious things, the cross burnings and all that kind of stuff when we look at history. Yes, that's racism, but racism is this thread that determines and impacts every area of your life: where you live, where you go to school, your ability to get a small business loan, or to get a home loan that's not a subprime mortgage that's not going to negatively impact you. Like that's racism done well.
That's right. Or
it's just out there in front to now it's hidden. And that's
not even hidden. It's just it's baked into every institution that we are relying on. It is essentially a part of the fabric of America. That's where we are. So if your privilege doesn't allow you to see that, that's step one. And there's no time to try to bring that to the attention of the masses. Unfortunately, we're beyond that. Institutions have to be broken and rebuilt. And when I say institutions, I mean those systems that we operate within to this day. And the one that's on the forefront, due to the most recent happenings, is the institution of policing. That institution has to be broken. That institution is an outgrowth of slave catching. Yep. Like it's a direct outgrowth of that. You've taken minuscule steps towards changing this institution to fit a new America, an America, a 2020 America, where you've got a rise in minority. Your institution doesn't fit that. It never has. It's time to change it. Mm-hmm. Banking institutions, you just spoke about the ability to get a mortgage that's worth its weight in an area that's safe and going to increase in value. Basic banking, procuring loans for small businesses or personal loans for home improvement or self-improvement or business growth. Or if you can't get that with the ease that your non-Black, non-minority counterparts can get, that's a systemic disadvantage. And it's baked into who we are and how we exist to this day. Education. If you can't operate on an equal playing field because you don't have the same educational opportunities, because your zip code dictates the amount of funding or the amount of resources that you get, because educational resources do not begin and end with funding. talking about the experiences and the exposure that you're allowed to have, that you're granted living in an area. I grew up in an area that's called the Corridor of Shame, that Bakari Sellers references often. The Corridor of Shame, meaning that this corridor in the state of South Carolina that I grew up in, the resources are so lacking, the finances so lacking, that it was shameful. They named it the Corridor of Shame. And yet we were able to come out of it, but not based on what the institution provided, but what the institution of our families, my family in particular, those who I grew up with, who had family and friends and community who said, we're not leaving you to the whims of this educational system. We've got to supplement this, because this is not enough. This is not equal. We can see that this is not equal. So you talk about banking, policing, education, healthcare. All of these institutions have to be rebuilt.
Yes.
And if you know anything about home renovation or construction, if your foundation's not firm, because first you go in and see what kind of bones you got. Because this thing was built some time ago. So let's go in and see what bones we're working with. How much of this can we salvage? Because the more we can salvage, the better off we are financially. But if we can't salvage the bones, and we try to anyway, you're pouring money down a pit, a bottomless pit. So you understand, let me go in and see what the bones look like. Let me see what the structure of this looks like. And if I can't salvage the structure, I got to tear it down. I got to tear it down and build up.
Yep.
It may cost me a little more, but in the long run, that's going to give me the best product. So that's where we are. We have to tear down institutions and rebuild. And that's going to be painful.
You're exactly right, man. We've got to do that. And, I was trying to think of an analogy to help people understand how racism and white privilege works. I think and I'm guessing, but I think when white people hear white privilege, they think, let's say we're trying to run a 100-meter dash, 100-yard dash. It sounds like white people hear it as they feel like we're saying that they're starting 50 meters ahead in terms of, I'm at 0, you're at 50, so you can go ahead and run the race. And so they push back because they're like, no, I had to work hard. I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I had to do yada, 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 yada. What I'm finding that it really is no, white people are starting at 0. They're having to run the full 100 yards, but we're starting at negative 50. So we're not discrediting your race by color or by the activity that we're talking about. We're not discrediting your journey. Yes, you had to run all 100 yards. You had to train. You had to eat right. You had to do all of those things. All we're saying is it's a privilege to be able to start at 0. Yeah. It's a privilege to be able to be judged in a meritocracy. Yeah. That's what we're saying. So we're not discrediting all the long hours you had to take for studying, for passing the bar, for getting your electrician's certificate, all that stuff. We're not disintegrating that at all. We're just saying at least you got to start at 0. And
your journey wasn't constantly chipping away at your humanity.
Correct.
Your boy Mark Lamont Hill posted at some point in this. It's been timeless for me as well. In addition to the bag of emotions, I can't even keep up with the time right now. But one of his posts was, "At what age were you when you had a gun drawn on you by the police?" And I happened to see it. It was about 9 minutes after he posted it, and he had 155 comments in 9 minutes. And it was essentially age X. I was doing A, B, and C. Age X. I was doing A, B, and C. That's a reality. Like, that's a reality that we endure.
Yeah.
I don't know one brother who has not had to endure discrimination and brutality of some sort, whether it be physical or emotional.
Yeah, the emotions. man, sitting there, being afraid, not knowing if this person's going to plant some evidence on you, or if they're going, I got pulled over a couple of times for fitting the description. But what does that mean? And so now I'm at your mercy. You can literally do whatever you want. You could put some weed in my car if you want. Oh, found it. You could shoot me and say, I was resisting. I am literally powerless, and I'm at your mercy. So even if you haven't been brutalized physically, you still hear those sirens and you're like, oh, thank God it wasn't me. And we're grown men and we're afraid of blue lights.
Especially if you've had that experience.
Yes.
You've had the gun pointed at you. You've had your rights trampled on in that moment, in that experience. So one of the things that's hardly everything. That's hardly all of the reasons why I've not been able to express and verbalize over the last few days. But that's the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that I've been fighting with is the internal fight in the community between planning and action.
Yeah.
There's some members of the community who have been planning for decades and they are done. They are done planning. As far as they're concerned, it's time for action. And then there are those who have finally come around to, okay, we can't wish this away. Like we've got to, and old tactics are not working. We've got to come. So they're approaching okay, what do we do then? How do we plan this out? How do we strategize this? And then you've got other segments of the community that are like, damn, a strategy. We've got all the strategy we need. It's time for action. So I've been torn in that space, and that I know both sides of that coin. I've inhabited both of those spaces, and I know it's hard to sort of bring the two together. So I don't want us as a community to get lost, to get diverted on trying to figure out what's the best way forward. What I don't want to happen is us to not take advantage of the moment. But what I do agree with those who say the time for getting lost in the paralysis of analysis is long gone. Like, it is time for action. To that point, Killer Mike's urging to the community to plot, plan, strategize, organize, mobilize is, if taken sincerely, if each point of each lighthouse in laying out that strategic move forward is taken seriously, is the way to go. We can't just run in the burning building just all out, because we know that our freedom exists on the other side of that building, and we've got to go through it to get to it. Like, there's got to be some strategy behind it. Like, we have always been told that we don't show up at the polls in the numbers that we need to. That's absolutely true, but it cannot stop at voting right now. That's got to be a start. That's just the start. That's the warm up.
Yeah.
Getting everyone registered to vote so that we can begin to change some of the policy. But we're getting everyone geared up to vote and get the right people in place to craft the right policy, because this thing has got to come from the ground up.
No doubt. And I'm with you. Where do we start? But I know doing nothing is not the answer. And much like this show, if you're watching this show and we're 5, 6 episodes, how many ever in, you've seen incremental improvement. Hopefully that's been the goal. We couldn't just say, well, let's wait until we get everything perfect before we start, because you never start. And so to your point, Wood, I think we just let's just tackle the thing that's in front of us. Police reform. Yes, we know that there's a million things behind it, but let's tackle this. Let's do something. And I think it's incumbent upon people like the two of us. Let's get involved, man. I mean, it may not be a whole lot. We might not run for office or whatever, but we got to do something. And the reason I have hope is because I mentioned it earlier. Something about this seems divine. Something about this really seems different. And I know we've said this before, but when I look at the allies across the world, when I look at even some white pastors who are starting to speak up and starting to say, oh, I get it now. Yes, we would have loved for them to get it before, but they're getting it now. It just feels like there's something, like there's this tidal wave coming behind it. And now I see white women talking about Breonna Taylor. Like, you know, let's not forget about Breonna Taylor. Say her name. And I'm like, what? Wow. Oh, okay. So it just feels different. It feels like this is the beginning. We can't lose heart. We can't lose strength. We're going to have to lean on one another. On one hand, I'm thinking, well, this means we're going to have a new president, but not necessarily, because there's a whole lot of time between now and November. Things could die down. The economy could improve, you know, and whatever. So we can't look at this as if November is the end of the line. We just have to look at it as this is just another step in the race. And I just fully believe that we're going to get there, because I feel like this is, and I'm using it from a spiritual perspective. I'm hearing people who have never spoken about race issues, who are telling other white people to shut up and listen. I've never heard that before. And it feels genuine. And there are people who are like, yeah, even if Black folks start to express their anger and their pain, because if you really talk to us, you know, we're talking about the conversations. Well, make sure you really want to have a conversation, because we're going to say some stuff that's going to challenge you. And it's going to be pain, frustration, anger, sadness, grief, all of that. But stay in the conversation. Don't get out. And if people can do that, I think we can actually get something done. I think policing, it starts there. Look, we're not even in schools right now in terms of physically. Education might be number 2. Changing the educational system might be that second wave. But whatever it is, we got to do something. And if just hosting a talk show helps, then we're certainly willing to do that. We're going to do our part as the Woodbury Collection, Woodbury Word. We give you our word on that. And we're not going to let this go. This isn't just a one-time, oh, let's just have a show about it. And nope, get used to it. We're talking about it. We're talking about it.
That's right.
We're talking about it. So I don't know what else to tell you. We're talking about it. But we want you to talk about it as well. So anything else before we leave?
Yeah, we'll be right back.
We got a part 2 coming for you. Peace.